Hey, everybody. You're about to hear a brief retelling of the movie Life Changer. Enjoy watching. Emily awakens in a hotel room to see a lifeless person on the bed beside her. She checks her body in the mirror, recognizing the knife wound in her belly, but she doesn't appear alarmed. There's the knife that did it, and Emily simply remembers all the times she's had to do this. She then cuts the body into pieces and places them in trash bags before carrying them to a farm. To destroy any remaining evidence, all of the parts are set on fire, and the ash is buried underground. After that, Emily returns to the city and spends a couple of hours in a cafe getting to know herself better, almost as if she had no idea what kind of life she was living. Later, when she gets home, Emily smokes to help her relax. James, her lover, pays her a surprise visit and is furious that she hasn't responded to his texts after going gone for 3 days. Even though he had contacted the police to locate her, he now needs to phone them again to let them know she is okay. Emily attempts to comfort James by showing him affection since she knows that calling the police will land her in hot water, but James rejects her and tries to phone the police once more. Emily, in a desperate attempt to save her own life, stabs him in the neck with a corkscrew. Subsequently, she conceals his corpse in the basement and cleans the floor and garments to remove the bloodstains. She takes a lot of medication as well. Emily is surprised to see the next morning that her body is decaying, something she hadn't anticipated happening so quickly. Detective Freddy arrives at her residence a short while later and becomes suspicious when he discovers she returned without alerting James. When he starts asking a lot of questions, Emily extends an invitation for coffee. She takes hold of Freddy's hand and begins to absorb his existence as he becomes sidetracked. It turns out that this is a shape-shifting entity that kills individuals in order to obtain their bodies, not Emily. The actual police officer's corpse was lifeless when the shapeshifter assumed the identity of Freddy, replacing the eerie body from the motel that had been Emily. Feeling pleased with himself for once, he examines the pistol and rehearses stating his name. After that, Freddy spreads gasoline throughout the house after using a hammer to remove the body's teeth so they can no longer be identified. He runs into the delivery man on his way out, so he grabs the meal without paying and drives off in the detective's vehicle. The home catches fire just as the delivery guy tries to stop him. Freddy then visits the neighborhood dealers, who identify him as the crooked police officer who always looks out for them. When it is discovered that the creature requires medication to stop the decaying, Happy Powder helps postpone it. He steals some and eats it all in the car. A while later, Freddy visits a pub and gives a pat to the dog at the door, who never fails to know him regardless of the body he wears. Seated at the bar, he approaches Julia, a lonely lady who seems startled that Freddy identified her favorite beverage, and asks for a drink. Although Freddy makes fun of himself as a psychic, he actually frequents this establishment frequently in various guises and observes her when she arrives each evening for a solo drink. They proceed to the alley behind the pub to share a passionate kiss after they soon become friends through conversation. Abdominal discomfort suddenly strikes Freddy, who becomes frightened and yells at Julia to go out. He becomes concerned when he understands that this is Emily's bodily wound because wounds have never moved with him. Grasping his wound, he stalks a couple in a vehicle by using his police badge as he wanders along the street. Rachel is ejected right away, but Freddy forces Sam to stay in order to take his corpse. Even as Sam tries to protect himself, the monster ultimately succeeds in his goal. The new Sam then drives the car to a quiet area to smash the body with a hammer, but before he can finish, his wife calls and begs him to return. When Sam returns home to his family, he finds out too soon that the pair is at odds with each other and that their relationship is in ruins. When one of the children jumps on him to wake him up the following morning, Sam can't help but shout at her to leave him alone. Still experiencing anguish from the wound, he hurries to his workplace, where he finds Rachel working as the receptionist, ignoring his family. Sam remembered that Rachel had rejected him while he had been pestering her, so Freddy intervened just in time to save her. Sam is a dentist, thus he treats Sam's patients as usual because the monster has previously resided in a dentist's body. When Sam visits a restaurant for his lunch break, he is startled to find Julia walking down the street. He rushes outside and attempts to flag down a cab to follow her, but the driver refuses, pointing out that it's stalking. Then he makes the decision to take a solo trip to the movies as a diversion. He has supper with his family in the evening, but this just makes him feel worse since he is unable to recall anything from his life prior to his body hopping. He also can't stop glancing at the blades since he has the will to kill. Sam ignores his family's concerns and heads to the pub because he has to drink to deal with his emotions. As Julia, who is seated next to him, recalls seeing him about with Rachel, Sam confides in her that his marriage is failing and that all he wants is to have some fun. In exchange, Julia says she had a son and a spouse in the past. Her marriage suffered for years when the kid, who was just 3 years old, passed away from a serious illness. Eventually, they were able to laugh and enjoy each other's company again when her husband treated her to a romantic meal one evening. After spending the night performing nasty work, Julia woke up the next morning to find her spouse had vanished from sight. Sam visits the restroom after having a drink with Julia and discovers that this corpse is also beginning to deteriorate. Fearing for his life, he bids Julia farewell and quickly hides at a motel where he eats more happy powder. A few hours later, he becomes anxious upon realizing that the rotting is spreading quickly and that he has to find a new body right now. After apologizing for what occurred, he contacts Rachel and asks her to come help him since he's unwell. Moments later, Rachel comes up to the motel, but Sam doesn't open the door, he simply instructs her to come in. When Rachel notices that there are no lights in the room, she becomes cautious and gently approaches the bed, only for Sam to grab her and take her body. It aches more than usual this time, for some reason. The latest taking in that she has enough of medicine, Rachel swallows another pill as she looks at the lifeless figure on the bed. She needs to give her lover an explanation for her midnight departure when he calls her at that precise moment. Rachel returns to the barn in the morning with the cut body in bags so she may conceal it and set it on fire. This time, though, she is noticed by a neighbor, who remarks that Rachel usually smells odd around here and inquires as to if Rachel knows anything about the owner of the barn. It is hinted that the monster previously took and disposed of the owner's body. Without saying a word, Rachel gets in her car and heads back to the dentist's office, where she uses her employee key to take a lot of medication. After that, she heads to her apartment and takes medication on a regular basis in the hopes that it would stop the decay. She chooses to get dressed up and head to the bar in the evening, not realizing that her lover Tommy is watching her depart. She sits down next to Julia, who knows her as Sam's date, after the dog greets her once again. After some time of conversation, Julia notices that Rachel has sad eyes. Rachel hands Julia her business card and says she's a counselor who can listen to you whenever you need it. After Julia departs to talk to Robert, John takes up her seat and begins hitting on Rachel. She first ignores him because she wants to watch Julia to find out how she is related to Robert. But at that very moment, she is depicted on TV as the primary suspect in a case involving the barn. She accepts John's advances since she needs to get away, and they head to her apartment together. They share some happy powder, and when Rachel refuses to let John get intimate, he becomes very combative and attempts to push things. Rachel shoves him away and goes to attack him with a knife, but John stops her in her tracks and disarms her. Then, after tackling him to the ground and breaking a bottle on his head, Rachel lets John get hold of the knife. When he attempts to attack her, Rachel beats him down with a lamp and gets the knife back. John attempts to flee downstairs after being stabbed once, but Rachel pursues him and stabs him several times in the hallway. After that, she heads back to the flat and gathers everything she needs to flee. While leaving, she hears a neighbor calling the police. She quickly flees, only to be spotted by the officers outside. Fortunately, she picks up more speed and uses a secret alley to locate an abandoned garage where she spends the night hiding. When she wakes up the following morning, her skin has already started to deteriorate and the dog is still lying next to her. Tommy, her boyfriend, who tracks her phone and comes up in the garage, also has several missed calls. Rachel smashes him with a bat and takes off because he wants to know the significance of her picture that was featured on the news. Rachel hides in the back of the vehicle as Tommy attempts to pursue her, feeling the agony in her abdomen returning. She needs a new body soon but doesn't want to take Tommy's because the detectives would probe him while hunting for her. Sensing he's running out of time, Rachel uses the location on the business card to track down Julia and break the news to her. However, she finds her meeting with Robert, which makes her very envious. She becomes inspired to stop Robert rather than Julia since the decaying on her arm is beginning to release pus. She follows him home, poses as the delivery person, and kills Robert for his corpse as soon as he answers the door. Subsequently, Robert calls Julia and shares his thoughts with her. She accepts to have supper at his house. They spend the evening together, and Julia confesses that there's something incredibly familiar about Robert, but she's not sure what it is. Robert gives her a flirtatious kiss, which rapidly becomes into something more inappropriate. Julia finds the wound on Robert's abdomen as a result of their caressing, but he begs her to ignore it, and they have a passionate night together. After that, Julia and Robert begin dating, and they have a great time together. When they feel like it, they get filthy, go on dates, and have a good time. After obtaining his desired outcome, Robert no longer feels the need to look for a new host, but he does return to see to the final corpse and dispose of it in the river. He continues to take medication as well. When Julia discovers she's seen every one of those 6 local fatalities on the news one morning, she knows she's met them all at the pub. Robert gives her a comforting embrace and swears to keep her safe. Robert ultimately comes to terms with the fact that he needs to tell the truth when he notices decaying on his hand that evening and feels discomfort in his belly once more. Robert tells Julia that they must speak and then relates his oldest recollection, which is that in 1954, as a little boy, he killed his mother by unintentionally assuming her body. He remembers feeling his mother's unadulterated love in her body, but he has no idea what he is or if there are others like him. He has been switching bodies ever since, but until the day he assumed Julia's husband's body, he had never experienced love so pure. He'd actually done the preparations for that special night, and he'd regretted having to say goodbye to her early the next morning. After that, he went back to the pub almost every day in a different body, hoping to make her feel at ease once more. Julia doesn't believe him at first, but after hearing about the specifics of the romantic evening, she loses it and pulls a taser out of her purse. Julia tases Robert down before hitting him a few times because she is too afraid of Robert's threats to injure her, even though Robert professes he loves her. Robert touches her and takes her body because he is desperate to live. She goes to the bar for a drink after realizing that she has slain the lady she loves, and she tells the bartender how much she appreciates his support. That evening, Julia allows the decaying to take over her body rather than body jumping. Surprisingly, her power doesn't kill her. Instead, it forms a terrible cocoon that she spends the whole night in. When the cocoon is broken in the morning, the creature acts as though it is the birth of an animal and runs to the mirror, where it sees an elderly man with several wounds, believing this to be the true him. Though he doesn't know what this implies, he walks to the park by himself to reflect. The dog soon follows.